thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode until the question and answer portion of today's call. During that time, if you would like to ask a question, please press star one. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. And I would now like to turn the meeting over to Julian Coltree. You may begin.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I am Julian Coltree, and I'm from NASA's Office of Communications. I'm very excited to have you joining us today. We have an incredible panel of experts that are ready to answer your questions about investigations launching aboard SpaceX's 29th commercial resupply mission to the International Space Station for NASA. NASA and SpaceX are targeting Saturday, November 5th at 10:01 p.m. for the launch of the company's Dragon cargo spacecraft atop a Falcon 9 rocket from Launch Complex 39A at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Here to talk with us about some of the research and technology launching aboard the Dragon spacecraft are Dr. Meg Everett, the Deputy Program Scientist for the International Space Station Program and Research Integration Office Deputy Manager at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston. We also have Dr. Jason Mitchell, Director of the Advanced Communications and Navigation Technology Division within the Space Communications and Navigation Program in the Space Operations Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters. We'll have Glenn Jackson, the Acting Project Manager for the Integrated LCRD, Low Earth Orbit User Modem and Amplifier Terminal, or ILLUMA-T, from NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland. We have David Cheney, Program Executive for the Heliophysics Science Division in the Science Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters. And we will also have Dr. Jeff Forbes, the Deputy Principal Investigator for the Atmospheric Waves Experiment, or AWE, at the University of Colorado Boulder. So you all know, we'll start off with an overview of the breadth of research going up on this mission, followed by a discussion of the ILLUMA-T payload. We'll then open the lines to media so that you may ask questions before we move on to our next speakers for remarks and Q&A about the atmospheric waves experiment. If we have time at the very end, we'll then take additional questions for either payload. Right now, your phones are on mute. To get into the question queue, you can press star one on your phone at any time. We'll call on you, and the operator will open your mic so you can ask your question. We do ask that you please stick to one question at a time and that you identify to whom your question is directed after you ask it. You may re-enter the queue with additional questions at any time. Members of the public are also encouraged to ask questions on social media using hashtag AskNASA. A replay of this teleconference will be made available on the NASA Videos YouTube channel following the telecon. And without further ado, let's dive in. To start off, we will hear Dr. Meg Everett, the Deputy Chief Program Scientist for the International Space Station Program and the Research Integration Office Deputy Manager, who will discuss the research being done aboard the orbiting laboratory. Meg, over to you.
All right. Well, thank you for that great introduction. And we are really excited to finally get to talk about the science going up on SpaceX 29. And a lot of this science, all of the science, really supports the initiatives of the NASA agency as well as the ISS program in supporting innovative research, being able to improve science capabilities on the International Space Station, and for future commercial and exploration programs, and to improve humanity on Earth or Earth-based capabilities using the space-based science. So I am going to tell you more at a high level about some of the science that's flying on the space station and why we really care on the ground and why we should really care to promote future space flight. We have a lot of technical experts on this call, so I am going to let them dive deep into the details and let you guys ask all of your technical questions to them. So some of the science that I'm going to talk about that's going up on SpaceX 29 are Earth-based or Earth and space-based science, technology development and demonstrations. They're in categories of physical sciences and biology and biotechnology. The first study or investigation that I'm going to talk about is Rodent Research 20. And that study is designed to look at reproductive health in female mice. So we will look at the function of the ovaries during flight and after flight, and we will look at some of the hormone receptors and some hormone signaling that will give us indication of the effects of microgravity on reproductive function, as well as hopefully improve some of our knowledge on reproductive health here on the ground. Another study is called Aquamembrane 3, and this is one of our technology demonstrations. And this is really important because it's looking to improve water filtration systems using aquaporin proteins. And why we're really interested in this in space is these proteins are found in every living cell membrane naturally, and they're naturally really good and strong water filters. So we're able to use this naturally occurring protein to improve our water filtration systems, both in space or even here on Earth in remote environments or highly polluted streams and areas like that. We can really improve our water filtration systems, reduce wastewater volumes, and also improve our recycling capabilities. So this is a really important study that we're doing, and it has huge potential advantages for Earth and space-based sciences. Gaucho Long is in the category of our physical sciences, and this looks at studying fluid transport within these gel-coated tubes. And the goal of doing this is to help us understand treatments for respiratory distress syndromes. And you might be asking, why do we need to do this in space? We should be able to do that in the ground. Well, some of the things that affect how well drugs are delivered through the respiratory system are dependent on the mucus lining of the lungs and those tubes, the wicking capabilities, and gravitational forces. So it's really hard to study all of those things in one spot and figure out how we best deliver drugs to these different populations. And when we do this work in microgravity, we're able to isolate some of the effects of gravity versus the wicking forces versus the mucus lining in these tubes. So we're hoping that being able to do this work in this new microgravity environment will provide better information on how we can deliver drugs to these different disease populations and really benefit health here on Earth. The other two studies I'm going to talk about in the areas of Earth and space science are Illumity and AWE. And as I said before, we have technical experts on the line that will give you lots of information in that area. But I just want to highlight why we care about that on the space station from a higher level. And so if we talk about Illumity, this is looking at using optical communication to send data from ISS back to here on Earth, where we'll have receivers in Hawaii and California. And this new optical communication allows us to package larger amounts of data and send that data faster. And that is really important for enhancing our capabilities to do science on the space station. So all of the research I talked about before for biology and fundamental research and medical applications, if we can get that data down faster to our researchers or our health and medical professionals, that improves life in space and it improves life in Earth dramatically. So this could have big capabilities for both ISS and for communications here on Earth. So we're hoping this will start off as a 6-month tech demo, and with good results, we're hoping this will be part of the ISS system where we'll be able to continuously improve this data coming down from the space station. The other study I'll talk about, which again you'll get more information of this, is AWE, and this is the atmospheric waves experiment, and it's designed to help us understand space weather and climate changes a little bit better. And this is exciting because it's really brand new capabilities and an innovative way to understand space weather and climate changes. It hasn't been done before in space, so what this is doing is looking at gravity waves, which are these kind of pockets of energy that move through the atmosphere. And these waves are very small at the lower atmospheres where they start, and then they grow and they're bigger at the higher atmospheres. So by having this technology on the space station at this higher atmosphere level, we can really measure those waves and hopefully start to understand what they mean to climate changes and space weather. And those are things, everyone knows we're very concerned about climate changes, so all of the data that we have to better inform those changes in the climate and understand what's causing those, that will obviously very much help life on Earth. And as far as space weather, there's always like the questions of what exactly is space weather. So in this case, we can really look at the winds, and the winds are very impactful on satellite and data transmission going to the ground and going back and forth to the ground. So better understanding these space weather predictions can also help improve our capabilities to transmit data from space and Earth or other satellite locations. So the experts, I'm sure, will talk much more about those different areas. But again, we're really excited to support the science on SpaceX 29, and I am super excited to hear from our Illuma and AW teams in this telecon. Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. Now we'll hear from Jason Mitchell, Director of the Advanced Communications and Navigations Technologies Division within NASA's Space Communication and Navigation, or SCAN program. Jason?
Thank you, Julian. Appreciate the introduction, and that was a great intro from Meg. I very much appreciate that. I hope I can match her clarity. For my part, with respect to Illuma, I'd like to provide some context about why we're doing this. So from the Space Communication and Navigation program at headquarters where I sit, SCAN is responsible for making sure that all of NASA missions can meet their science and exploration needs to get all of the data that they need to get back and to understand sort of from the navigation perspective where they are and sort of what time it is. Right? Those are all very important things to make sure that missions can be successful, critical in fact. I think we can all agree that as terrestrial users of communication systems, we're all very hungry for data, and that's no different from space users. And so space users want as much data as they possibly can from the existing assets, but future missions have potentially exceptionally large data needs, and so we have to think about how we're going to meet those needs, and that's sort of where I fit in the technology side in SCAN to do that. And so I think we all understand that more data means more discoveries, and so this is why optical communication becomes so interesting, because optical can deliver between 10 and 100 times more data for a smaller sort of effective swap, size, weight, and power on the space terminal side. And on the ground side, it's well understood how to receive light at telescopes. And I think the other sort of surprising benefit of considering optical is that unlike the radio frequency spectrum, the optical spectrum that we're using, this sort of optical C-band around 1550 nanometers, that spectrum is not regulated like RF spectrum. And so it helps overcome other challenges in missions being able to execute as they have less difficulty in the process of getting licensed spectrum to operate. And so in that context, SCAN developed and is executing a systematic risk reduction program to bring optical communications into operational use for space users with an eye towards providing that in the context of an enterprise architecture for communications. And because we have such a diverse user group, right? We have users in low Earth orbit, maybe in medium Earth orbit and geosynchronous orbit, users that are in cislunar space and at the moon, and then users that are beyond the moon in deep space. In fact, even the Voyager missions are beyond the solar system, outside the solar system right now. And so we have to be very thoughtful in that enterprise architecture to make sure that we can reduce risk so that users can bring this on. And make sure that it's not a risk for them to their mission, right? Their primary mission is their focus, not sort of the infrastructure needed to execute the mission. And so it turns out that Illuma is actually the fifth launch in this sort of risk reduction roadmap. And I'd like to sort of walk through the steps that we've executed to get here, and sort of the last bits here as we're finishing off this risk reduction activity. The first was our feasibility activity back in 2013, which was the Lunar Laser Communications Demonstration (LLCD). It was part of the Laser Atmospheric and Dust Environment Explorer, the LADEE mission. That was just to see if we could do it. Would optical communication work in space. In this case, it was from lunar orbit direct to Earth. And in that case, we were able to deliver 622 megabits a second from the lunar orbit to Earth. That was where we accepted, yes, we can do this. And so then we developed this existing risk reduction roadmap. And that first launch in that was the Laser Communication Relay Demonstration, LCRD, that was launched in December of 21. That's a geostationary satellite that can talk, as Meg said, to 2 ground sites right now. And it has an optical bidirectional rate of 1.244 gigabits a second, so substantially higher than our traditional radio frequency links. Following that, in May 22, we launched the terabyte infrared delivery small sat demonstration with the target of achieving 200 gigabits a second from low Earth orbit direct to Earth. And we were able to demonstrate with that delivering nearly 5 terabytes of data in a single pass of a ground site that lasted less than 5 minutes, about 4 minutes and 30 seconds. So that's a substantial leg up in science and exploration, being able to deliver large volumes of data with relatively few passes. And just recently, you may all have been aware that in October, we launched the Deep Space Optical Communications Demo, DSOC, that's part of the Psyche mission. And that is the next piece to push us beyond the moon and to understand and develop operational knowledge of what it's going to take to enable optical at Mars-like distances with the focus on exploration, right? Being able to send humans to Mars, and all of the precursor work that will be the science to be able to enable that, like site selection for landing. That brings us to number 5, which is Illuma itself, and I'll talk a little bit about what its function is after we talk about the roadmap. And then the final bit of this is the Optical to Orion demonstration that will be part of the Artemis II mission, and that will be a demonstration just like this with Illuma to bring that into the human spaceflight architecture, understand what operational needs are for that, but from a lunar perspective. And so with that sort of roadmap target, we'll just say that with respect to Illuma T, going to ISS, this is the completion of what LCRD was to demonstrate, and that is an optical relay architecture. Some folks may be aware that SCAN also operates another relay system called TDRS, the Tracking and Data Relay Satellite System. So that's a set of satellites in geosynchronous orbit around the Earth that provides 360-degree, 24/7 coverage, so that if you're a space user, you can connect to TDRS and get your data to the ground no matter where you're at or when you need that, right? And so that relay capability is extremely important for many missions. And much in that same way, LCRD is targeted to show that relay architecture, but from an optical link perspective. In order to show that and verify that entire architecture, you need to have a space user, and a payload terminal, Illuma T, to ISS is the perfect way to do that, and integrate that into the human spaceflight architecture to understand what are the impacts of operating something like this, high data rate capability, on human spaceflight, and to get us thinking how we might use it and leverage it in the future, which are things that we don't really know until we really start to try it out. And with that, I'll turn it back. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Glenn Jackson, Acting Project Manager for Illuma T. Glenn?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Jason, for setting the context of what we're doing. Let me dig in a little deeper into the demo. So a few weeks ago, I had the awesome opportunity to help with the integration of the payload into the SpaceX trunk. Basically, the payload is about the size of a refrigerator, and we've integrated it into the SpaceX trunk just below the SpaceX capsule. It looks great there. It's ready for the launch. So we're going to take that up to the station. And one of the exciting parts of this, I find, is our optical payload will complete the experiment with LCRD and provide, instead of a simulated low Earth orbit user, this will be the first user for that optical geo relay. So if you can imagine, if you have a laser pointer and you're trying to point that laser to a whiteboard or to your chalkboard in your classroom, sometimes you see that laser bouncing around a bit. One of our big goals in this demonstration is to demonstrate the pointing of that laser system and the communication from the ISS as it's traveling in its orbit at about 400 kilometers above the Earth, 18,000 miles per hour, up to the laser communication relay demo that's over the Pacific right now at about 36,000 kilometers. So a very exciting activity in our demo, which will be coming up very shortly. So in the name itself, we have, Illuma-T is quite an acronym, but in the name itself, we have the LCRD, the LEO, the modem, the amplifier, all part of this laser system that will be mounted on the ISS very shortly. Thanks.
Thank you, Glenn. Now we'll take questions about Illuma-T. Please press *1 to be entered into the queue. And while we give those on the call a chance to queue up and get their questions ready, we're going to ask a question from #AskNASA. Jason, I'll direct this one at you. This user at ScienceToday001 would like to know if the Illuma-T method was already used in the Psyche mission, correct?
So actually, that's a little bit different. The Psyche mission, its electronics are focused for deep space. And so that requires sort of very, very specific photon counting because the signals are so weak. And so we call those high photon efficiency or HPE methods. The Illuma and the LCRD combination are close enough and the powers are manageable enough that we don't have to count individual photons. So that modem is much more like the LCRD modem, those back-end electronics. And so that lets us reach much higher data rates, right? Think about the data rates for the high photon efficiency are more like in the low hundreds of megabits a second, potentially up to the mid, like the 500s, depending on how much power you're able to get into it. But that's sort of really the difference between the Illuma implementation for the back-end electronics as compared to something like, say, 020 or the Psyche electronics. Over.
Appreciate that answer. We have another question from Ask NASA. This one comes from @AstroDude. Similar to what is being used in the Interstellar movie, laser-based communication is the best we can come up with so far. How will the laser-based communications tools improve communications between the ISS and Earth?
This is Glenn at NASA Goddard on the Illuma-T team. So improvements is a whole bunch. It allows faster data. It allows greater magnitude of the data. It allows for dedicated availability. As we talked about earlier, the RF spectrum, radio frequency spectrum, is very congested. So this type of demonstration, as we integrate the payload into the system, and we go through and we verify the connectivity to LCRD and verify basically the Ethernet connectivity to the ISS system, will provide opportunities for the ISS in terms of magnitude and rate. As Meg described earlier, science begets science in some sense. There's going to be a revelation of what can be done and what can be done faster in terms of science. And this also applies to exploration, too, as we go to the moon and we replicate space stations and relay communication at the moon. Thanks.
Thank you for that answer. One last question for the Illuma-T team right now. We'll direct it at Jason. Jason, how might laser relay systems be useful for future science and human exploration missions?
So I alluded already to the TDRS satellite system. I think it's optical relay is like that, just on steroids, right? And so I think many of the space user community have become reliant on TDRS, and of course TDRS is flying out, right? There will be no replenishment of TDRS. So those satellites that are there will operate until they reach their end of life. And then there will be no replenishment. Something like LCRD would enable the next generation of that, right? You would be able to have optical relay providing support for anyone that needed to get their data down at any time at very much higher rates. And if you think sort of even longer term, right, if I put my prognostication hat on, you can think about having relays be able to support sort of bidirectional communications, even including the moon, right? If you just have to be able to turn your send-receive capability to the moon, and you can relay data from the moon to Earth. And so I think there's from an enterprise architecture perspective, depending on where missions will drive us, because remember, SCAN works with missions to make sure that they can meet their need, and mission needs are unique. We don't try to just one size fits all for everybody. Whatever the mission needs is what we'll attempt to execute. And from an enterprise perspective, I think optical relay can play a very important role in enabling much higher return to enable much more discoveries, much more learning, much more greater understanding in the future. Over.
Thank you for that answer, Jason, and thank you to the entire Illumity team for such an excellent description of that experiment. We'll now transition to learning more about the atmospheric waves experiment, beginning with David Cheney, Program Executive for the Heliophysics Science Division in NASA's Science Mission Directorate.
All right, David. My name is David Cheney. I work for heliophysics. I thought I would talk about heliophysics quickly. Heliophysics is a study of the sun and how it works. So we want to understand how the physics of the sun works, but also how it interacts with Earth and everything within our solar system, and then also how it interacts with the universe. Space weather, we've already heard about that a couple times. Space weather is a key part of that interaction with the Earth that we care a lot about. And heliophysics has the responsibility for studying space weather within NASA and advancing that research. So a couple of things that you might be familiar with from a NASA perspective within the heliophysics portfolio of satellites that are already on orbit. Voyager 1 and 2 that were launched a long time ago, 1977, are still taking measurements, so we get to see how the solar system, the sun actually interacts with the rest of the universe. You have SOHO that's been up there for a long time, since 1995, taking measurements directly of the sun. And then we also recently we have Parker Solar Probe that's getting really close measurements of the sun to fly through the corona and take measurements of the sun's atmosphere. So AW works directly with all of these different satellites and experiments to help us better understand how the sun interacts with the Earth. So the AW experiment measuring the gravity waves, we already heard about this one, where we want to understand that connection between the Earth's weather that we experience, the climate patterns and weather systems, and how that interacts with the space environment. So just a couple of key people involved in the AW experiment. You have Mike Taylor, who's the principal investigator or the lead scientist from Utah State University, Space Dynamics Lab in Logan, also in Logan, Utah, is building the payload, and then the Goddard Space Flight Center is helping to manage this as a heliophysics experiment. We're really excited about all the sun and things that are happening. So just a week and a half ago, we had the annular eclipse that started what we're calling the heliophysics big year. This is the first launch. We get to add another science experiment on orbit to measure some of the effects that we have. In April, we'll have a total solar eclipse. And then December of 24, we're going to have the Parker Solar Probe, closest approach to the sun. So we're excited about all of the different science we're going to get through this heliophysics big year. I'm really excited to see what kind of science we're going to get contributed from the AW experiment. And that's all for me.
Thank you, David. Finally, we have Dr. Jeffrey Forbes, Deputy Principal Investigator for the Atmospheric Waves Experiment from the University of Colorado Boulder. Dr. Forbes, take it away.
Well, thank you very much. I'll discuss from the more scientific aspect, specifics, So the AW instrument on the space station will image waves in infrared emissions from the hydroxyl molecule, the OH molecule, in a thin layer near about 87 kilometers altitude. You've probably, from the ground, looked up in the sky and often seen wave patterns in clouds. Well, these same or similar waves appear at 87 kilometers altitude in a thin layer that emits the emission from the OH molecule. So the AW instrument will be looking down at these waves, taking 1 image per second. So that's 86,000 images per day. And I might also add that these waves are referred to as gravity waves, but they're not the gravitational waves in the astrophysical context that you sometimes hear about, but they're actually buoyancy waves. So they're generated when air masses are suddenly lifted up and gravity pulls them back down, and then buoyancy lifts them back up again, and so on. And so these waves are generated by flow over mountains, convective storms, and other weather systems. And from a scientific point of view, gravity waves are important for transporting energy and momentum throughout the whole atmosphere. And in particular, the gravity waves grow with height as the air becomes thinner, and they become quite large at the all altitudes. And so AW will make the first global measurements of these waves at what we generally consider to be the transition from atmosphere to space. So the edge of the atmosphere, or the edge of space, which is at about 100 kilometers altitude. Now, what we're observing will be the gravity waves passing through the OH layer and on to higher altitudes. And at these higher altitudes, about 250 to 400 kilometers, current modeling and observations suggest that they impose their variability on the ionized particles referred to as the ionosphere. And this variability in the ionized particles of the atmosphere can interfere with radio wave propagation. So they affect communications, navigation, and tracking systems. So this is the type of space weather that we're talking about here. We sometimes refer to it as near-Earth space weather. And so AW will make an important first pioneering step to measure the waves entering space from the atmosphere. And we hope to be able to link these observations with the weather at higher altitudes in the ionosphere. So I welcome any questions on the AW mission.
Thank you, Dr. Forbes. We'll now take questions about AW. Again, please press *1 to be entered into the queue. And while we wait for journalists to submit their questions, we'll ask a moderator question. Dr. Forbes, this is for you. Will AW be able to detect seasonal variations in atmospheric gravity waves?
Sure. So AW actually will produce wide swaths of measurements over the globe. So every 4 days, the AW will produce maps covering about 85% of the globe. And so over a 2-year mission, we will be able to see or delineate not only the seasonal variability, but the latitudinal variability between about 53 degrees south and 53 degrees north over all longitudes. So yes, indeed, we'll be measuring the seasonal variability.
Thank you, Dr. Forbes. And now this question is for David. David, how do you think AW data could inform future areas of study?
Well, from a science perspective, anytime you learn more about something, you find all the areas you don't really know anything about. So I expect that we're going to learn a lot from the AW mission, and then it'll point us to areas that we didn't even realize we need to learn more about. And so that'll help us understand holes in the science that we need to understand.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that. If there are no other questions, then we will wrap up the teleconference. I want to thank our speakers for all their great work, and to those of you participating and listening for your interest in these important investigations that are launching aboard NASA's SpaceX CRS-29 mission. You can follow all the research being conducted during Expedition 70 on the space station by visiting nasa.gov/station research news or by following at ISS_research on X. As a reminder, a replay of this teleconference will be made available on the NASA Videos channel on YouTube. And stay tuned to nasa.gov for regular updates in advance of the upcoming launch. Launch broadcast coverage is currently tentatively scheduled to begin at 9:30 p.m. on Sunday, November 5th. Thank you all for joining us, and this concludes today's telecon.
Thank you for participating in today's conference. All lines may disconnect at this time.